Dr. David Romano had always been good with his hands. As a scientist who studied alien life forms, he spent most of his time in labs, looking through microscopes and writing reports. At 34, he lived alone in a small apartment near the United Nations building in Geneva, where he worked for the Interspecies Relations Division. His life was quiet, predictable, and exactly how he liked it. That Tuesday evening changed everything. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks. Earlier on official embassy paper, Centauri Embassy was hosting their annual cultural exchange dinner, and all UN staff were invited. David almost threw the invitation away. He hated formal events, especially ones where he had to wear a suit and make small talk with diplomats. But his boss had made it clear that attendance wasn't really optional. So there he was, standing in the grand ballroom of the Centauri Embassy, holding a glass of something blue that tasted like mint and electricity. The room buzzed with conversation. In at least 6 different languages, including the musical tones of Centauri's speech that always reminded David of wind chimes, the embassy itself was a marvel of alien architecture. The walls seemed to shift color depending on the angle of view, and soft lights floated freely through the air without any visible source. David had been there for work meetings before, but never for a social event like this. He was trying to find a quiet corner. When he heard what sounded like distress calls coming from near the ceremonial garden area, 2 young Centauri females were standing by a fountain, making urgent gestures and speaking rapidly in their native language. Their translator devices seemed to have malfunctioned, leaving them unable to communicate with the human guests who had gathered around them. David had studied basic Centauri language as part of his job training, though he was far from fluent. He could make out a few words, something about water, danger, and help. The 2 aliens looked panicked, their skin shifting to the pale blue color that indicated distress in their species. Without thinking twice, David pushed through the small crowd that had formed around them. The other humans were just standing there, unsure of what to do. One of the young Centauri females had tears streaming down her face, which was unusual since their species rarely showed emotion in public. "Hey, it's okay," David said softly, approaching them slowly, with his hands visible. In his basic Centauri, he asked, "What's wrong? How can I help?" The taller of the 2 aliens, who appeared to be in her early 20s by human standards, pointed frantically at the fountain. David looked closer and saw that someone's ceremonial jewelry had fallen into the water. In Centauri culture, he remembered. From his training, losing family heirlooms during important ceremonies was considered extremely bad luck. "We'll get it out," David assured them, rolling up his sleeves. But as he reached toward the water, both aliens grabbed his arms, shaking their heads violently. The shorter alien managed to say in broken English, "Sacred water, humans cannot touch. Grandfather will be very angry." David realized the problem. The fountain wasn't just decorative, it was a religious artifact. Humans weren't supposed to make contact with it. But the jewelry was clearly valuable and meaningful to these young women. Looking around, he spotted a maintenance worker's tools. Near the wall, he grabbed a long-handled net typically used for cleaning pools and carefully guided it into the fountain. After several attempts, he managed to retrieve the delicate silver necklace that had fallen in. As he handed the jewelry back to its owner, both young aliens began speaking rapidly in Centauri. Their skin color shifted from distressed blue to a warm golden hue that David recognized as gratitude. we went to where what our way I went when I Greg or to salt Gavelin and where to wait for our guy well we're good for wait for They each placed one of his hands on their shoulders while speaking what sounded like formal words. David didn't understand what they were saying, but he could tell it was important. The entire room had gone quiet, and he noticed that the adult Centauri present were staring at them with expressions he couldn't read. Some looked shocked, others seemed pleased, and a few appeared concerned. Thank you, the taller alien said in English, still holding his hand to her shoulder. You are very kind, human. David smiled and nodded, assuming this was simply their way of showing appreciation. He had helped retrieve their lost jewelry, and they were thanking him in their traditional manner. It seemed perfectly normal to him. As the evening continued, David noticed that the Centauri staff kept looking at him differently. Several of the alien diplomats approached him for conversation, asking about his work and his personal life in ways that seemed oddly specific. The ambassador himself, an elderly Centauri with intricate tattoos covering his arms, spent several minutes speaking with him about his family background and future plans. David found it all a bit strange, but assumed they were just being polite since he had helped the two young women. He finished his drink, made his excuses, and headed home. Thinking nothing more of the evening, the next morning David woke up to his phone ringing non-stop. His answering machine was full of messages from reporters, his boss, and several people he didn't recognize. When he finally answered, his supervisor's voice was tight with stress. David, where are you? You need to get to the office immediately. There's been a situation. What kind of situation? David asked, still half asleep. The kind that involves lawyers, diplomats, and possibly international news coverage. Just get here now. David arrived at the UN building to find his office surrounded by people in expensive suits. His boss, Director Patricia Williams, was standing in the hallway looking like she hadn't slept all night. David, we need to talk, she said, leading him into a conference room where several officials were waiting. Do you remember what happened at the embassy last night? I helped some young women get their jewelry out of a fountain, David said slowly. Why? Is there a problem? One of the officials, a man with a briefcase full of legal documents, cleared his throat. Dr. Romano, according to Centauri law and the interspecies treaties signed in 2157, you are now legally engaged to be married. David stared at him blankly. I'm sorry, what? The ritual you participated in last night, the official continued, placing your hands on the shoulders of the consul's granddaughters while they recited the traditional bonding words, constitutes a formal betrothal contract under Centauri law. The room seemed to spin around David. Betrothal contract? I was just helping them get a necklace out of the water. Patricia leaned forward. David, those weren't just any young women. They were Zara and Lyra Valdris, granddaughters of Consul. They're on Valdris, the highest-ranking Centauri official on Earth, and according to their customs, you've just agreed to marry both of them. David felt like he was having a nightmare. Okay. But I didn't agree to anything. I don't even speak their language properly. The legal official opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Unfortunately, ignorance of cultural law isn't considered a valid defense under the Global Interspecies Accord. The Centauri Embassy filed the official paperwork this morning. You've been formally notified of your engagement. As David sat there trying to process what was happening to him, he realized that his quiet, predictable life had just become the most complicated situation imaginable. He was facing the possibility of being forced into marriage with two alien beings he had met for less than 5 minutes. AO because he had tried to help them retrieve a lost necklace. The worst part was that refusing the engagement could cause serious problems between Earth and the Centauri planets. His simple act of kindness had somehow become a matter of interstellar diplomacy. David looked around the room at all the serious faces staring at him and realized that his life would never be the same again. David spent the next 3 days hiding in his apartment, refusing to answer his phone or door. News vans lined the street outside his building, and reporters shouted questions through his windows. The story had exploded across social media with Hashtags like hashtag alien marriage and hashtag diplomatic wedding trending worldwide. His refrigerator was nearly empty. He was living on instant noodles and whatever canned food he could find. Every time he looked out his window, camera flashes went off like lightning. The whole situation felt like a bad movie, except he was trapped in the starring role. On Thursday morning, someone knocked on his door with a pattern he didn't recognize. When David looked through the peephole, he saw a woman in a sharp business suit holding a briefcase. She didn't look like a reporter. "Dr. Romano, my name is Lisa Chen. I'm a lawyer who specializes in interspecies law. I'd like to help you." David cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock attached. "How do I know you're not another reporter?" Lisa held up her Bar Association card and a business card through the gap, because reporters don't usually offer free legal representation. "May I come in? We have a lot to discuss." 20 minutes later, David was sitting across from Lisa at his kitchen table while she spread legal documents across the surface. She was younger than he had expected, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "First. Things first," Lisa said. "This situation is unprecedented, but it's not hopeless. I've been studying interspecies law for 8 years, and I believe we can fight this." "Fight what exactly?" David asked. "I still don't understand how helping someone get jewelry out of a fountain equals getting engaged." Lisa pulled out a tablet and showed him a video from the embassy's security cameras. "Watch this carefully. See how they place your hands on their shoulders? That gesture, combined with the words they spoke, constitutes what Centauri culture calls a bonding ceremony. It's their equivalent of a marriage proposal." David watched himself on the screen, looking completely clueless about what was happening. "But I didn't know that. I was just trying to be helpful." "That's exactly our argument," Lisa said, making notes on a legal pad. "You cannot be held to an agreement you never consciously made. This violates your basic human rights." Over the next hour, Lisa explained the complex web of laws that govern relationships between humans and alien species. The Global Interspecies Accord of 2001-57 was designed to prevent conflicts between different cultures, but it had created some unusual legal situations. "The problem," Lisa continued, "is that the Centauri legal system doesn't recognize ignorance as a valid excuse. In their culture, all adults are expected to understand basic diplomatic protocols." "So what are our options?" David asked. Lisa closed her tablet and looked at him seriously. "We go to court. We argue that forcing you into this marriage violates your constitutional rights. It won't be easy, though. The Centauri have hired the best interspecies lawyers money can buy." The next week, David found himself sitting in a federal courthouse that had been specially modified to accommodate different alien species. The courtroom had adjustable seating, multiple translation systems, and environmental controls for beings who couldn't breathe Earth's atmosphere normally. The Centauri legal team arrived in impressive style. Their lead attorney was a tall, imposing figure named Keth Morvac, who spoke perfect English with a slight musical accent. Behind him sat Consul Theron Valdris, an elderly Centauri with silver skin and elaborate ceremonial robes. David got his first good look at Zara and Lyra, the two aliens he was supposedly engaged to marry. They sat quietly beside their grandfather, looking as uncomfortable as he felt. Zara was taller and seemed more serious, while Lyra kept glancing around the courtroom with curious eyes. "Your Honor," Keth Morvac began when the proceedings started, "this case is quite simple. Dr. Romano participated in a legally binding ceremony. The interspecies treaties clearly state that cultural laws from both species must be respected equally." Judge Alina Rodriguez, a veteran of several interspecies cases, listened carefully as the Centauri lawyer presented evidence. They had documentation showing that David had received standard diplomatic briefings about Centauri customs as part of his job training. David winced as they played recordings of the mandatory cultural sensitivity meetings he had attended. He remembered sitting in those sessions, but honestly, he had been thinking about his research projects instead of paying attention to alien marriage. Customs Lisa stood up for David's defense. "Your Honor, my client was not acting in a diplomatic capacity that evening. He was a private citizen attending a social event. The fact that he had received some cultural training does not mean he consented to marriage. The courtroom was packed with reporters, protesters, and curious spectators. David noticed that the crowd seemed divided. Some people held signs supporting his right to choose his own marriage, while others carried banners about respecting alien cultures and keeping treaty promises. During a break in the proceedings, David found himself in the hallway when Consul Valdris approached him. The elderly alien moved slowly but with dignity, his ceremonial jewelry making soft, chiming sounds as he walked. "Dr. Romano," the consul said in accented but clear English, "I want you to know that this situation brings me no joy. My granddaughters are good girls who deserve happiness, not a husband who is forced upon them." David was surprised by the consul's directness. "Then why are you pushing for this marriage?" The old alien's expression grew sad. "Because in my culture, backing down from a formal bonding ceremony would bring great shame to my family. My granddaughters would be seen as unworthy of marriage, and their futures would be ruined." "They're just kids," David protested. "By Centauri standards, they are both over 120 years old," the consul replied. "That makes them adults in our society, though I understand they seem young to humans." As the legal battle continued, David began to realize how complex the situation really was. This wasn't just about him anymore. The outcome would affect diplomatic relations between Earth and the Centauri worlds. It would set a precedent for future interspecies relationships. And most importantly, it would determine the fate of two young women who had no more choice in this matter than he did. The media coverage intensified daily. David couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse every morning. Some called him a hero fighting for human rights, while others labeled him a treaty breaker who was damaging Earth's relationship with friendly alien species. Late one night, as David sat in his apartment reading legal documents, he found himself wondering about Zara and Lyra. What were they thinking about all this? Were they as trapped as he was? Did they want this marriage, or were they just following their culture's expectations? The questions kept him awake until dawn, and he realized that whatever happened in court, his life would never be simple again. The quiet scientist who just wanted to study alien life forms had become the center of the most important interspecies legal case in human history. As he prepared for another day in court, David wondered if there might be a solution that could save everyone's dignity and freedom. But with lawyers, diplomats, and the media all watching his every move, finding that solution seemed almost impossible. After 3 weeks of heated legal arguments, Judge Rodriguez called for a final recess before delivering her verdict. David sat in the courthouse cafeteria, stirring his coffee without drinking it. His hands were shaking slightly, and he couldn't stop thinking about how this decision would change his entire future. Lisa sat across from him, reviewing her notes one last time. "Whatever happens, we've made a strong case," she said quietly. "The judge seems to understand the human rights issues involved." David nodded, but his stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Through the cafeteria windows, he could see the crowds of protesters outside getting larger. News helicopters circled overhead, and police barriers kept the different groups separated. The whole world seemed to be waiting for this decision. They returned to the courtroom. Judge Rodriguez looked tired but determined. She had spent hours reviewing interspecies law books and consulting with legal experts from around the world. This case would set a precedent that could affect thousands of future situations. After careful consideration of all evidence and arguments, the judge began. "This court finds that while the bonding ceremony was technically valid under Centauri, law and recognized by existing treaties, it cannot be enforced without the genuine consent of all parties involved." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. For a moment he thought he was free. However, Judge Rodriguez continued, and David's heart sank again. Centauri tradition requires a 6-month cohabitation period before any bonding contract can be formally dissolved. Dr. Romano must live with the Valdris family during this time. To give the relationship a fair chance, as required by their cultural law, the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushed to their phones, protesters outside began chanting louder, and the legal teams on both sides looked equally surprised by the compromise decision. David stared at the judge in disbelief. 6 months? He asked Lisa, who was frantically taking notes. It's better than a forced marriage, she whispered back, but it's still not ideal. Keth Morvac, the Centauri lawyer, looked displeased but nodded formally to the judge. Consul Valdris sat very still, his expression unreadable. Zara and Lyra exchanged glances, but remained quiet. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel to restore order. This arrangement will allow Dr. Romano to understand Centauri culture while respecting his right to make an informed decision about his future. The 6-month period begins immediately. As David left the courthouse, reporters surrounded him with cameras and microphones. "How do you feel about living with aliens?" one shouted. "You going to go through with the marriage?" asked another. Lisa guided him through the crowd without stopping to answer questions. "We'll make a statement later," she told the reporters. "Right now, my client needs time to process this decision." 2 days later, David found himself packing his belongings into boxes. The Centauri embassy had prepared special living quarters for him in their residential wing. He would have his own room and bathroom, but he would share common areas with Zara, Lyra, and their grandfather. The embassy staff helped him move his things, and David was surprised by how normal they seemed. They asked about his work, commented on his book collection, and seemed genuinely interested in making him comfortable. It was easy to forget that they were from another planet. Consul Valdris met him at the entrance to the residential area.
"Dr. Romano,
"I want to establish some ground rules for our living arrangement," he said formally. "My granddaughters are not prisoners, and neither are you. We'll respect each other's privacy and customs." David nodded, grateful for the consul's practical approach. "I appreciate that. I want to make this work for everyone. My granddaughters speak excellent English," the consul continued. "They have been studying human culture for many years as part of their diplomatic training. I believe you will find them to be intelligent and interesting companions." When David first saw his living space, he was impressed despite his anxiety. The room was larger than his apartment, with a comfortable bed, a desk for his work, and a small sitting area. The walls displayed gentle, shifting patterns of light that were supposed to be calming. Zara and Lyra were waiting in the common area when he finished unpacking. They had changed from their formal court clothes into casual outfits that looked almost human, except for the subtle shimmer of their skin and their distinctly alien features. "Hello, David," Zara said quietly.
we want to apologize for this whole situation. We never meant for our gratitude to cause you such trouble."
"We feel very bad about what happened," Lyra added. "In our culture, the bonding ceremony is supposed to be a joyful celebration, not a court case." David was struck by how sincere they seemed. "It's not your fault," he said. "None of us knew this would happen. The first few days were incredibly awkward." David didn't know how to act around his supposed fiancés, and they seemed equally uncertain. Meals were particularly difficult. As they had to accommodate 3 different dietary requirements and eating customs, David learned that Centauri people ate smaller portions more frequently throughout the day, and they had strict rules about food preparation. Zara was vegetarian by choice, while Lyra enjoyed meat but couldn't digest most earth spices. Finding meals that worked for everyone became a daily challenge. The media attention was relentless. Photographers with long lenses tried to capture images through the embassy windows. Reporters interviewed anyone who had ever met David, from his college professors to his neighbors. The story had become a global phenomenon, people taking sides and debating the issues on social media. Inside the embassy, David tried to maintain some normalcy by continuing his research work. The Centauri had provided him with an excellent laboratory space, and he found their scientific equipment fascinating. Their technology was decades ahead of human capabilities in some areas. Zara often joined him in the lab, showing genuine interest in his research on alien biology. She had studied agricultural science on her home planet and was curious about Earth's ecosystems. Their conversations gradually became more natural as they discovered shared interests. Lyra spent most of her time in the embassy's library, which contained books and media from dozens of different worlds. She was working on learning additional human languages and seemed particularly drawn to literature and poetry, as the first week passed. David began to see them as individuals rather than just the aliens he was supposed to marry. They had personalities, opinions, and dreams, just like anyone else. Zara was serious and analytical, while Lyra was more creative and emotional, but the pressure of the situation weighed on all of them. They were living under constant scrutiny, with their every interaction potentially reported in the news. The knowledge that David would eventually have to make a decision about their future hung over every conversation, late at night. David often lay awake wondering what would happen at the end of the 6 months. Would he really be able to walk away from these two people who were becoming part of his daily life? And if he did leave, what would happen to them? 3 weeks into his stay at the embassy, David woke up feeling terrible. His head was pounding, his throat was sore, and he felt like he had been hit by a truck. He tried to get out of bed but ended up collapsing back onto his pillow, shivering. Despite the warm temperature in his room, he managed to send a message to his supervisor saying he was sick, then buried himself under blankets and tried to sleep off what felt like the worst flu of his life. David had always been the type to tough out illnesses alone, preferring to recover in private rather than bother anyone else. Around noon, there was a soft knock on his door. "David, you okay?" Zara's voice came through the wall. "You missed breakfast and grandfather was asking about you." "Fine," David called back weakly, though his voice came out as more of a croak. "Just feeling a little under the weather?" 20 minutes later, another knock came, this time more insistent. "David, we're coming in," Lyra announced. "You don't sound fine at all." Before he could protest, both Zara and Lyra entered his room, carrying what looked like medical supplies and containers of soup. They took one look at him and immediately began speaking rapidly in Centauri to each other. "You have what humans call the flu," Zara said, putting on protective gloves. "We studied Earth diseases as part of our diplomatic training. This could be dangerous for our species, but we have vaccines that protect us." David was too sick to argue as they took his temperature and checked his symptoms. He was surprised by how gentle and professional they were, working together like a trained medical team. "Why are you helping me?" he asked between coughs. He could get in trouble for being exposed to human germs. Lyra sat down in a chair beside his bed, maintaining a safe distance, but staying close enough to talk. "Because you're sick and you need help. Isn't that what friends do for each other?" The word friends hit David unexpectedly. Over the past few weeks, he had been so focused on the legal situation and the pressure of their arranged engagement that he hadn't really thought about what kind of relationship they were actually building. For the next 3 days, Zara and Lyra took turns checking on him. They brought him soup made from ingredients that were safe for humans, helped him stay hydrated, and even set up entertainment systems so he wouldn't be bored while recovering. During his fever, David found himself having long conversations with both of them. Maybe it was because he was too sick to maintain his usual polite distance. Or maybe it was because they were finally seeing each other as real people rather than characters in a legal drama. Zara told him about her dream of developing new farming techniques that could help feed people on planets with harsh climates. She had grown up seeing hunger on some of the outer colonies and wanted to use science to solve real problems. "On my homeworld, we have plants that can grow in almost no water," she explained, while adjusting his blankets. "I think I could modify them to work on Earth too. Imagine helping farmers in desert areas or places where climate change has made growing food difficult." Lyra shared her love of storytelling and how she had been secretly writing poetry that combined Centauri and human literary styles. "I want to create something new," she said one evening while bringing him tea. "Something that shows how different cultures can blend together to make something beautiful." David found himself opening up to them in ways he hadn't expected. He talked about his childhood, his work, and his fears about the future. He admitted that he had always been a loner, preferring his research to social relationships. "I never had many close friends," he confessed during one of their late-night conversations. "I always thought relationships were too complicated. Maybe I was just scared of getting close to people." As David recovered, something fundamental changed between the three of them. The awkwardness that had marked their first weeks together began to fade, replaced by genuine friendship and mutual respect. They started eating meals together regularly, sharing stories about their different worlds and cultures. Zara taught David some basic Centauri cooking techniques, while he showed her how to use Earth-based laboratory equipment for her agricultural research. Lyra introduced him to Centauri music, which sounded like nothing he had ever heard before. The melodies seemed to flow like water, with harmonies that made him feel calm and happy. In return, he shared his collection of classical human music, and they spent hours listening to everything from Bach to jazz. The media began to notice the change in their relationship. Photographers caught glimpses of them walking together in the embassy gardens, laughing and talking like old friends. The headlines shifted from forced marriage drama to unlikely friendship blooms. David realized that for the first time in years he was actually enjoying himself. He looked forward to waking up each morning because he knew he would have interesting conversations and new experiences with Zara and Lyra. But this growing friendship also made everything more complicated. The 6-month deadline was approaching, and David knew he would soon have to make a decision about the marriage contract. The problem was that his feelings were no longer simple. He cared about Zara and Lyra deeply, but was that enough? Did caring about someone mean you should marry them? And how could he even consider a romantic relationship that had started as a legal obligation? Late one night, David sat in the embassy garden thinking about his situation. Consul Valdres found him there, sitting quietly under the stars. "You seem troubled, young man," the old Centauri said, settling onto a bench nearby. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," David admitted. "A few months ago, I didn't even know your granddaughters existed. Now I can't imagine my life without them in it. But I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just because we've been forced together." The consul nodded thoughtfully. "In my culture, we believe that the heart knows its own truth. The circumstances that bring people together matter less than what they choose to build together." "But what if I'm wrong?" David asked. "What if I'm just confused because this whole situation has been so strange?" "Then you will learn from your mistake and grow wiser," the consul replied. "But if you let fear keep you from following your heart, you may regret it for the rest of your life." As David looked up at the alien constellations visible from Earth, he realized that his biggest challenge wasn't deciding whether to honor the marriage contract. His biggest challenge was figuring out what he really wanted from life and whether he was brave enough to reach for it. The quiet, predictable existence he had built for himself suddenly seemed empty compared to the rich, complicated, wonderful. The relationship he was developing with two extraordinary people from another world. The 6-month deadline was only 2 weeks away, and David couldn't sleep. He spent most nights walking around the embassy gardens, trying to sort out his feelings. The decision he had to make would affect not just his life, but the lives of Zara, Lyra, and their entire family. The media pressure had reached fever pitch. Every day, reporters asked embassy staff for updates on David's decision. Social media was full of polls asking people what they thought he should do. Some people called him selfish for even considering walking away, while others said he was crazy to consider staying. David tried to ignore the outside noise and focus on what really mattered. Over the past months, his life had become richer and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. Zara's passion for science matched his own, and their research conversations often lasted deep into the night. Lyra's creativity and humor had brought laughter into his world in ways he never expected. But was that enough to build a marriage on? And how could 3 people from 2 different species possibly make a relationship work? The answer came from an unexpected source. One morning, David found Consul Valdres sitting alone in his study, looking older and more tired than usual. The elderly Centauri was staring at a photograph of his deceased wife. "Consul, are you all right?" David asked, genuinely concerned. The old alien looked up with sad eyes. "I have been thinking about my granddaughter's futures, Dr. Romano. In our culture, family honor is everything. If you choose to leave, they will be seen as rejected women. No Centauri male will want to marry them after that." David felt a knot form in his stomach. "I didn't realize the consequences would be so severe for them." "But," the consul continued, holding up a hand, "I have also been thinking about happiness. My wife and I had an arranged marriage, but we grew to love each Other deeply, however, forcing love never works. It must grow naturally, or it becomes a prison for everyone involved. The consul stood up slowly and walked to his window. I have made a decision that will shock my people, but I believe it is the right one. I am releasing my granddaughters from all diplomatic obligations. They are free to choose their own paths. In life, regardless of what you decide. David stared at him in amazement. You would do that for them? A grandfather's job is to protect his family's happiness, not just their honor, the consul replied. I have watched Zara and Lyra these past months. They have grown more confident and joyful than I have ever seen them. Whether that is because of you or because they finally have freedom to be themselves, I cannot say. But I will not take that growth away from them. That evening, David called a meeting with Zara and Lyra in the embassy's main sitting room. His hands were shaking as he tried to find the right words for what he wanted to say. I need to tell you both something important, he began. These past months have been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. You've both taught me things about myself that I never knew. Zara and Lyra sat quietly, watching his face carefully. David could see they were nervous about what he might say. I care about both of you more than I thought possible, David continued. But I also know that the marriage contract we're bound by isn't fair to any of us. None of us chose this situation. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, and Zara reached over to hold her hand. David realized they thought he was about to say goodbye. But he said quickly, I don't want to say goodbye either. I want us to create something new, something that honors both our cultures while giving us all the freedom to be ourselves. David took a deep breath. I'm proposing that we become a family, but not in the traditional way. We could be partners in life and work, supporting each other's dreams and goals, without the pressure of a forced marriage. Zara spoke first. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we build a life together based on friendship, respect, and genuine affection, David explained. We could live together, work together, and care for each other, without the legal obligations that brought us together in the first place. Lyra wiped her eyes and smiled for the first time in weeks. We would be choosing each other rather than being forced together. Exactly, David said. And if romantic feelings develop naturally over time, we can address that then. But there would be no pressure, no obligations, and no shame if any of us decides to pursue other relationships. 2 days later, the three of them appeared before Judge Rodriguez for the final hearing. The courtroom was packed with reporters, diplomats, and curious onlookers who had followed the case from the beginning. Your Honor, David said when called to speak, we have reached a decision that we believe serves everyone's best interests. He explained their proposal for a companionate partnership that would satisfy Centuria's honor while respecting human individual rights. The arrangement would be legally recognized, but not binding, allowing any party to leave if they chose. Judge Rodriguez listened carefully, consulting with legal experts before making her ruling. This court finds the proposed arrangement to be both innovative and practical. It respects the cultural values of both species while protecting individual autonomy. The companionate partnership is hereby legally recognized. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Outside, protesters who had been divided for months suddenly found themselves celebrating together. The compromise had given everyone something they wanted. 6 months later, David, Zara, and Lyra were living in a beautiful house outside Geneva. Zara had established a research laboratory where she worked on developing drought-resistant crops for both Earth and Centauri colonies. Lyra was writing a book about human Centauri cultural exchange that had already attracted interest from publishers on multiple worlds. David continued his work in xenobiology. But now he had 2 brilliant partners who brought new perspectives. To his research, their home became a gathering place for scientists, artists, and diplomats from many different species. The relationship between the 3 of them had evolved into something none of them had expected. They were family, best friends, and scientific collaborators all at once. Romantic feelings had indeed developed, but naturally and without pressure, creating a bond that was stronger than any legal contract. One evening, as they sat together, watching the sunset from their garden, Lyra asked David if he ever regretted that night at the embassy when everything started. David thought for a moment, then smiled. You know what? I think that was the luckiest mistake I ever made. I thought I was just helping someone get a necklace out of a fountain, but I actually found my family. Their story became famous throughout the galaxy as an example of how different species could build meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The legal precedent they had set was used in dozens of similar cases, helping other people navigate the complex world of interspecies relationships. Most importantly, they had proven that love and family could take many different forms, and that the best relationships were built on choice, respect, and the freedom to grow together at your own pace.